Okay, it's 9 o'clock, everybody. So, hi all, and welcome to the Central Valley Regional Webinar. It's the first webinar of this series. We are happy to be here. Please bear with us if there are any technical difficulties. This is the first time we're actually doing one of the SB 1383 webinars, just all web-based. So we will see how it goes. So my name is Ashley Yee. I'm CalRecycle's SB 1383 Implementation Manager. And before I turn it over to Julia Doloff, who will go over logistics of the webinar, I wanted to introduce all these lovely faces to you. So from CalRecycle, we have Kara Morgan, who's representing collections and edible food. And we have Julia Doloff, representing collections, and who helped put together all of these webinars. So thank you so much, Julia. We really appreciate it. We have Scott Beckner, Tim Hall, Michelle Dewey, and Kristen Pidcock representing procurement. And we have Alan Elizorio and Trisha Moore representing compliance and enforcement. Also joining us, and happy to have them here, is HF&H Consultants. So we've invited them to participate because HF&H managed and developed the 4 CalRecycle model tools. As a reminder, the tools are the model franchise, model ordinance, model organics product procurement policy, and model food recovery agreement. And HF&H can respond to any related questions. They're also available to provide insight on how cities, counties, and JPs across the state are tackling 1383 based on their experience assisting dozens of jurisdictions with compliance needs, including developing action plans, 1383 aligned franchises, processing agreements, ordinances, and more. So from HF&H today, we have Rob, who is HF&H president and leading the 1383 efforts. We have Tracy as well, who is the senior manager with HF&H, and Philip, who is a senior associate with HF&H. So thank you all for participating. And if you could turn off your webcams right now, and then we'll turn them back on when we get to the question and answer period. And I will turn it over to Julia to go over logistics.
Thanks, Ashley. So let me just get the PowerPoint back up and running. Okay, so good morning, everyone. I'm just going to give you a brief overview of how today is going to go. So each team will provide an overview presentation of the regulatory requirements for each specified topic. Afterwards, there will be a Q&A session in which CalRecycle staff will unmute participants to allow you to ask your question over the webinar. And there will be a Q&A session after each topic, so after edible food, procurement, and then collections. So please use the instructions shown on this slide for the Q&A session. If you'd like to ask a question, please type your question or a synopsis of what your question covers into the question pane. CalRecycle staff will unmute you in the order that questions come in. And note that you will need to unmute yourself on your end when asked by CalRecycle staff. And please state your affiliation before asking your question. We will try to get to as many different people as possible, and we may skip over those who have asked multiple questions. However, as time allows, we will always go back to anyone that we skipped. Questions and comments regarding the merit of the regulations were responded to during the rulemaking period. Therefore, today we will be focusing only on questions or clarifications regarding implementation and tools. If we do not get to your question today, we will follow up with you at a later date. Now I'm going to hand it off to Kara Morgan, who will be presenting on the Edible Food Recovery Program requirements.
Thanks so much, Julia. As part of California's larger strategy to combat climate change, Senate Bill 1383 established an edible food recovery goal. No less than 20% of currently disposed edible food must be recovered for human consumption by 2025. I would like to clarify that this is not a goal for individual jurisdictions or for individual food facilities to recover 20%. Rather, it is a statewide goal that Californians must collectively achieve. I would also like to clarify that while there is a baseline for measuring organic waste, there is not a baseline for measuring edible food recovery. So CalRecycle will likely be using the 2018 waste characterization study to help measure the baseline for edible food recovery. In that study, we measured the amount of potentially edible food. So why is the statewide goal so important? We are seeing so many examples of wasted food rather than feeding people that are hungry. And since COVID, the number of people that don't have enough to eat has doubled. This is just one more reason these regulations are so critical. Another reason, the law was designed to reduce the global warming superpollutants like methane, which is up to 84 times more potent than carbon dioxide. Recycling organic waste and recovering edible food is a fast track to combating climate change. It's critical that we address climate change now. And as Californians, we're resilient and we have to work together to achieve these goals. And CalRecycle is your partner in this effort. While the regulations take effect in 2022, jurisdictions have to plan now. And CalRecycle understands that not every jurisdiction will have everything in place on January 1, 2022, but each jurisdiction must be making the effort. Next slide. So today I'm going to go over edible food recovery policy components in the regulations. I'm going to discuss how edible food recovery is defined. This is so important to understand what edible food means. Second, I'll discuss the direct requirements on commercial edible food generators, who they are and what is required. And third, I will cover the requirements for each jurisdiction in California. And finally, I'll discuss the requirements on jurisdictions to implement their edible food recovery programs. Next slide. So what does edible food mean? It means food intended for human consumption. We also specified in the regulations that nothing requires that edible food be recovered if it does not meet the food safety requirements of the California Retail Food Code. So just because the food is intended for human consumption does not mean it is safe to recover. It must be intended for human consumption and also meet all of the food safety requirements that are specified in California's Retail Food Code. We also specified in the definition of edible food that it is not solid waste if it is recovered and not discarded. This is so important. This material that is generated before the trash container, this is food. And if we look at the US food recovery hierarchy, source reduction and waste prevention at the top, followed by recovering food to feed people. This is what we want to do with this food. This is not waste. I wanted to show you on the slide here, the photos on the left were taken from one of CalRecycle's Waste Prevention and Rescue Grant recipients. These are some amazing recoveries that have been happening at K-12 schools and school kitchens. Showing you a contrast, the food on the left is from an unsupervised open buffet line where customers serve themselves. And most county health departments would not allow that food to be donated. That's what we mean by the food being safe to recover. Next slide, please. So secondly, I'd like to talk about the direct requirements that are placed on the commercial edible food generators. These are the generators that are required to recover the maximum amount of edible food that would otherwise be disposed and be recovered for human consumption. So on the slide here, you can see that we have separated these generators into two tiers. The first, Tier 1 commercial edible food generators are required to start donating their edible food starting January 1, 2022. And Tier 2 must start January 1, 2024. We separated these generators into two tiers for a couple of reasons. First, many of the Tier 1 generators already have food donation programs in place, so they are participating in some kind of food donation program already. So it's not going to be as heavy a lift for them. The Tier 1 generators also typically have larger amounts of edible food available to donate to food recovery, more so than Tier 2 generators. And they typically have less prepared foods available, so it's a lot of fresh produce or grocery items. Whereas the Tier 2 generators, they may not have food donation practices or programs in place, and so this might be really new to them. They also may have smaller amounts of edible food available in general. And there are quite a few of them in this category that have a lot of prepared foods, including hot prepared foods. So they're going to need more time to get their programs in place. The infrastructure and capacity that's needed to be able to recover that edible food is lacking in certain areas in California. So we want to give jurisdictions, commercial edible food generators, and food recovery organizations and services this additional 2 years to prepare for compliance and help build capacity where additional capacity is needed. Next slide. The key requirements for commercial edible food generators is first, to arrange to have the maximum amount of their edible food that would otherwise be disposed be recovered for human consumption through a contract or written agreement, either with a food recovery organization or service that will collect their surplus edible food, or have that contract or agreement with a food recovery organization that will allow the generator to self-haul their edible food. I want to talk about self-haul for a minute. We added this into the regulations based upon feedback from the California Association of Food Banks. It's very expensive for these organizations and services to recover this edible food. They are often dependent on philanthropic or government funding and grants, and many do not have sustainable funding. So it would help them if generators are self-hauling. However, that self-hauling has to be included in that contract or written agreement. And under no circumstances should a commercial edible food generator self-haul edible food without permission from the food recovery organization or service. This is absolutely critical to prevent donation dumping. There is also nothing in the regulations that prohibits a food recovery organization or service from charging a fee for that service that they are providing to the generator. Many of these food recovery organizations and services are doing far more than recovering food. Some are providing federal tax donations, and some are providing important data on the amount of food that has been recovered. Next slide, please. So to help commercial edible food generators comply, CalRecycle with HF&H Consultants developed a model food recovery agreement. So if a generator calls a jurisdiction and that generator doesn't know how to start or where to find an agreement, this tool could be shared. The tool is highly customizable. It's intended to help the commercial edible food generators to comply. The regulations are silent on what needs to be in the contract or written agreement. So although we provide this as a model and it is customizable, it does not have to be used, but it can be used. And we hope it will be used to assist with compliance as much as possible. Next slide. So let me talk a bit about capacity planning. The county and each jurisdiction within the county has to work in collaboration to collect critical information that will help produce an impactful edible food recovery capacity planning analysis. The county is responsible for leading this effort. And just like with organic waste capacity planning, the county is responsible for collecting the edible food recovery capacity planning information from each of the jurisdictions, rolling that up, and submitting a report to CalRecycle on specific dates for both edible food recovery and organic waste recovery capacity. They're responsible for identifying any jurisdiction, including themselves, that does not have enough verified existing planned or new edible food recovery capacity. And they have to inform that applicable jurisdiction that if they have not identified verified existing planned or new capacity for edible food, that they will have to submit an implementation schedule to CalRecycle within 120 days from when the county submits its report. I also want to note the county is not responsible for ensuring and enforcing that each of the cities conduct the edible food recovery capacity planning. And I'll discuss this in more detail about what the individual jurisdictions are responsible for doing. So the coordination might be done in lots of different ways. For example, the county and the jurisdictions might develop a plan for the tasks and timelines that need to be completed. And then as a group might decide who's going to contact certain food recovery organizations, who's going to contact tier 1 and tier 2 commercial edible food generators. So a lot of coordination and an opportunity to collaborate with each other. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the county and each individual jurisdiction needs to do the following. Each of them needs to estimate the amount of edible food that will be disposed by the commercial edible food generators that are located within each of the jurisdictions. And also, I'd just like to let you know that in April and then in May, CalRecycle will be providing capacity planning calculators, and in May, we'll be providing training to help you all with this calculation. One of the first steps in doing this is identifying the Tier 1 and Tier 2 commercial edible food generators. CalRecycle will be providing guidance next month in March to jurisdictions on approaches that you can use to identify your generators. I would also like to note that capacity planning does not require that these estimates be exact or absent of any error or uncertainty. Next slide. So the next step is identifying the existing, new, and planned capacity that's available in that jurisdiction that the commercial edible food generators will be able to utilize. This is absolutely critical information that must be collected in order to be able to determine if there is additional edible food recovery capacity that will be needed. CalRecycle will be providing in March jurisdictions with a survey tool to collect information from food recovery organizations and services. You can begin contacting these organizations and services located in your jurisdiction now to find out how much they collect now, if they could collect more, if they currently collect from any of the Tier 1 or Tier 2 generators, and what would be needed to expand if more capacity is needed. Because this effort requires the county to submit a report to CalRecycle, each of the individual jurisdictions must be responsive. They must provide any data that the county asks for within 120 days. This timeline helps ensure that the county staff can meet their time commitments. If the timeline is not met, the county does not have to include the edible food recovery estimates for that individual jurisdiction in its report to CalRecycle. However, the county must inform CalRecycle if a jurisdiction did not provide that information. The jurisdiction, again, would not be responsible for that. And in this situation, if a jurisdiction failed to provide the capacity planning information, CalRecycle could take enforcement action on that jurisdiction. Next slide. Jurisdictions are required also to engage with really important entities. I've talked about the food recovery organizations and food recovery services. They play a critical role in helping to identify what capacity is available and what is needed. Based upon feedback from stakeholders, coordinating with these organizations will help give us the best available data. Food recovery organizations and services that are contacted by a jurisdiction need to also be responsive and should respond within 60 days of a request being asked. This will help us all to develop a more collaborative and impactful edible food recovery capacity planning analysis in a timely manner. Next slide. As I mentioned earlier, the county's role is the same for organic waste recovery and edible food recovery capacity. If a jurisdiction's data determines that there is not verified existing new or planned available capacity, the county is required to notify that individual jurisdiction that lacks the capacity on or before the date that the county submits the report to CalRecycle. That jurisdiction then will have 120 days to submit an implementation schedule to CalRecycle. This schedule will demonstrate how that jurisdiction will ensure enough capacity to recover the edible food that's currently disposed by commercial edible food generators within its jurisdiction by the end of that reporting period. The implementation schedule must include timelines and milestones for these planning efforts. It must include obtaining how the jurisdiction will obtain funding for edible food recovery infrastructure expansion. This might be done through modifying franchise agreements or demonstrating other means of financially supporting the expansion of this capacity. The individual jurisdiction will also need to identify facilities, operations, and activities inside the county that could be used for additional capacity. In developing this implementation schedule, again, consultation with food recovery organizations and services is necessary. And finally, as I mentioned before, if CalRecycle is informed by the county that a jurisdiction failed to provide the necessary information, we will take enforcement action on that jurisdiction if necessary. I hope that won't be the case. I really believe that with everyone collaborating together and putting their best effort forward, that we will all be successful. Lastly, I would like to note that there are no waivers for edible food recovery, so all jurisdictions must plan and submit the required data for edible food recovery capacity planning. Next slide. In addition to capacity planning, Jurisdictions are responsible for implementing their edible food recovery program. This means educating commercial edible food generators about the requirements, as well as providing education to all generators about edible food recovery. Jurisdictions will need to increase generators' access to food recovery organizations and services. Jurisdictions will also need to monitor commercial edible food generators' compliance. This will help ensure that these generators are complying with the requirements. We also included language in the regulations about how jurisdictions might fund their edible food recovery program. LA City is an example of funding for edible food recovery that is built into their franchise agreement, and we are seeing more jurisdictions considering this approach. Finally, in our model franchise agreement tool that we developed with HF&H consultants, we addressed this as well. Next slide. Part of the education of commercial edible food generators includes the jurisdictions maintaining a list on their website of the food recovery organizations and services that are operating in the jurisdiction. This list must be updated annually. The list must include name, address, contact information, collection service area, and the types of food accepted by each of the organizations. I would like to clarify that the list does not have to include all food recovery organizations and services that are operating in the jurisdiction, but only that a list is maintained. The list should consist of food recovery organizations and services that have a good track record of safely and efficiently recovering edible food, as that will help the jurisdiction meet their needs. Part of the jurisdiction's education generators is where this list can be located. Next slide. Going back to the requirement that jurisdictions monitor commercial edible food generators' compliance. The inspection program must ensure that each generator has a contract or written agreement for edible food recovery. They must ensure that the generator is maintaining its records. This includes the established frequency of collection, types of food donated, and the amount of food in pounds donated per month. Based on the review of the records, the jurisdiction can determine that the generator is maintaining records, has a contract or written agreement, and it looks like the generator is donating the maximum amount. Really, what you're looking for to verify is that the maximum amount of food is being donated. You're really looking for red flags. For example, if the inspector is at a supermarket and the records indicate they donated 2 pounds in the last month, that could be a red flag and may warrant further investigation. In that situation, the inspector might ask if they're donating the maximum amount and verify that they say that they are and that the records indicate that. Inspections also are tiered, with beginning in 2022 for Tier 1 commercial edible food generators, and in January 1, 2024 for Tier 2. Inspections are annual, but the jurisdiction does have flexibility to establish the frequency of those inspections. Jurisdictions are going to need to decide which staff conduct these inspections. For example, some jurisdictions will contract with the county health department to have health inspectors conduct the inspections as a part of their routine inspections for food facilities. Some jurisdictions will utilize their own staff. We're seeing quite a variety across the state. I would also like to again point out the number of inspections need to be sufficient to adequately determine overall compliance. However, the jurisdiction or its designee can prioritize inspections that it determines are more likely to be out of compliance. There is not an annual requirement for these inspections. And finally, we've provided this flexibility knowing that many jurisdictions will contract with their Department of Health. And we included this so that they could, Department of Health could include this in their existing inspections on a frequency that works for them. We can talk more about that later if you have questions. Next slide. Just regarding record keeping and reporting, this slide provides a high-level overview of what's required. And next slide. And finally, this slide is a summary again of the key dates. I do want to clarify that the education of both Tier 1 and Tier 2 generators begins in 2022. The reason for this is because for many Tier 2 generators, this will be something new, and they will need time to establish their program, including having that contract or written agreement in place by January 1, 2024, and also training employees. In 2024, the jurisdictions are required to take enforcement action against non-compliant entities. Next slide. In conclusion, I would like to thank all of the stakeholders that have worked with us over the last 3.5 years to help inform the development of these regulations, and to each of you for beginning the planning that is necessary so that we can successfully achieve our goal to provide edible food to those that do not have enough to eat and deal with our climate emergency now. Together, we will make California stronger and more resilient. I'll open it up to questions. Thanks, Julia.
Thank you, Kara. So for those of you who are joining us a little late, I just want to give a quick reminder of how this Q&A session is going to go for edible food questions. So again, just follow the instructions shown on the slide. To ask a question, please type out your question or a summary of it into the question pane. CalRecycle staff will unmute participants in the order that questions come in. You must unmute yourself on your end when asked by a CalRecycle staff member. We will try to get to as many different people as possible. And please note that we will only be responding to questions or clarifications regarding implementation and tools. If we cannot respond to your question today, or we do not have a chance to get to your question, we will follow up with you at a later date. So myself, Julia, and another CalRecycle staff member, Sarah Sanders, we're going to be helping facilitate this Q&A process. So with that, we will get started. And Sarah will hand it off to the first question.
Luke Fieldstein, you are now unmuted. Please unmute yourself to ask your question and state your affiliation.
Can you hear me? Luke Feldstein, Tulare County Solid Waste Department. The question I typed in there, I think the first one was answered. It was really just a question of typically what type of regulatory oversight per jurisdiction would be used, but you did say public health or county health agencies would be the one making the determination of edible food. But I was wondering if there will be like a state clearinghouse that would have a list of providers that would provide that service for collection and the donation, so that jurisdictions might be able to get to them and find out if they would fit within their criteria to get their plan up and running.
Sure, I'll go ahead and start, Ashley, and then if I miss anything, you can join in. So, first and foremost, I think we are seeing most jurisdictions starting to have conversations with their county Department of Health, to work out that arrangement. Some jurisdictions are looking to utilize their own inspectors that are already going out to businesses. There are some inspectors, for example, that conduct inspections related to water. So, we're seeing a variety there. So I think the important thing is that you are starting to have a conversation with the county and county Department of Health, and just kind of figuring out how you're going to do these inspections and getting that game plan in order. CalRecycle is not going to maintain a list statewide of all of these food recovery organizations and services. There's a lot of reasons for that. One, we want jurisdictions to engage locally with these organizations and services. Also, to maintain an accurate list would be incredibly difficult. These organizations and services can be quite fluid, some starting and stopping, etc. So, we did decide that this should be something done at the local level. And again, but we are here to help you, and we have a lot of resources. We've been really working with a lot of jurisdictions. So if you need help, your local assistance liaison can assist you in that effort. Ashley, anything to add?
Nope, I think you nailed it on the head. Yeah, that's something that, we did explore, is providing some kind of list. But like Kara mentioned, it would be very difficult for us to keep it updated. So we don't want to give you guys the wrong information. But always here to help if you do need some kind of starting point. Always happy to have conversations with your public health or environmental health folks as well.
All right, our next question is from Dominic. Dominic, you can go ahead and unmute yourself to ask your question, and please state your affiliation. Okay, so I will read out Dominic's question. So his question is, when appropriate, I'd like to know how or if correctional facilities like my jail might be required to participate, and is there a liability exemption because inmates handle food?
Thank you, Dominic, for that question. So when we look at entities, it's important to look at the tier 1 and tier 2 definitions. So for example, if a jail for some reason has a restaurant that meets the definition, then it would be eligible. However, if it just, if we're talking about the cafeteria that provides the food to the inmates, that would not fall under the tier 2 definition of a restaurant. So that's how you kind of look at it. And if you have any other scenarios, we're happy to help you with that. But again, typically we're finding that a jail would not meet the definition. But again, without knowing your specific circumstance, and if there's a restaurant on site that meets the definition, but likely not. Ashley, anything? Next question.
The next question is from Nam. Can we send organic waste to facilities located outside of California? And are these additional requirements to ensure the facilities comply with SB 1383?
Ashley, do you want to start with that one? I know the answer as well, but I can't remember if we actually published an FAQ yet on that.
Sure, I don't know if we have either, but I'm guessing this is outside of edible food specifically, and they're just talking about organic waste. So you can send it to facilities located outside California. Since SB 1383 is a California regulation, we actually don't have any authority over out-of-state facilities. So I think Nam had left the webinar, but we can always follow up too if they have any more questions.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe we'll make note of that. That's probably a good one for us to add to our FAQs because we've had others ask that question. Thanks. Next question.
So our next question is from Angela Frost. Angela, you can unmute yourself to ask your question and please state your affiliation.
Sure, hi. I'm Angela Frost. I'm with the City of Lincoln in the Solid Waste Department. I'm senior analyst there. And my question is there a requirement for commercial generators to donate their edible food items locally? And the reason I ask this is because we have Raley's and Safeway, and I know they have backhaul programs, but they could be taking it outside of our jurisdiction, maybe to another city like Sacramento, and that wouldn't really benefit locally, you know, our food service organizations. So I don't know if this regulation requires them to do this now locally instead of somewhere else.
Right, thank you for that question. So the regulation does not prescribe that they have to use a local organization or food service provider. A lot of the tier 1, as I mentioned, commercial edible food generators already have food donation programs in place, and it may be more efficient for them to backhaul edible food and then it gets collected. So there's a lot of different models. I think certainly the tier 1 commercial edible food generators are going to be more apt to use local services, and so I think it's just going to be kind of depend, Angela. So does that help answer your question?
Yeah, no, that helps.
Yeah.
I just wanted to know if they had to or if they had some choices, but that does help. Thank you very much.
You know, I think, well, people sometimes think it's not very flexible. We really did build a lot of flexibility into these regulations, and that's a great example of flexibility we built in.
Okay, thank you.
Virginia, you are now unmuted. Please unmute yourself and ask your question and state your affiliation.
Hi, Virginia Fowler with Mid-Valley Disposal. So the first question is there a fee that the jurisdiction will have to pay a health inspector to perform the inspection needed?
So Virginia, I think ooh, we have a lot of echo. Can you mute Virginia? Cool, thank you. So I think it's going to depend. I think it's going to depend on, you know, what the interaction is with the County Department of Health. So, you know, I really can't advise you on that without, you know, knowing what County Department of Health might need in order to add this piece to an existing food inspection. I think there are some County Department of Health inspectors that have said, you know, this is just, you know, I'm looking, what I have to do is look to see that that generator has a written contract or agreement. So not a lot of extra work, and I'm going to give them education. So I think it's just going to depend, and you really need to have that conversation with your own county Department of Health to figure that out. Did you have another question, Virginia?
Yes, I do. So the other question is, since as part of a franchise agreement, the hauler is being required to assist with food recovery program, can the hauler perform the inspection, provided there's documentation, photos, and all needed documentation, and then forward that to the jurisdiction so that the jurisdiction in turn can do the enforcement?
So first and foremost, I want to clarify, there's nothing in the regulations that require the hauler via the franchise agreement to be in charge of edible food. What we're seeing across the state are that haulers are, because many of them are interacting with commercial businesses, they are providing education information about what's available for commercial edible food recovery, but they aren't necessarily, I'm not aware of any examples where the hauler is conducting the actual inspection, et cetera. We also have specific requirements in the regulations with respect to who can be delegated to conduct an inspection and conduct enforcement. So Ashley, would you like to add to that?
Well, I want to turn over to HF&H to see if they have any insight as well. Have you heard of this before with your cities or counties or JPAs?
Good morning. There are certainly situations where the hauler is being asked through their outreach to businesses to identify who these tier 1 and tier 2 folks are. But as was stated earlier, most of the haulers are preferring not to be in an inspection and enforcement role. And actually the regulations sort of direct that to local agencies. So in almost every case, the hauler's role is stopping at identification.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, and I do think, potentially that hauler is going to play an important role in communicating, because again, they're engaged with those generators, and if they see a need, they're going to have that ability to communicate back to the jurisdiction. Hey, I was out here, this is a business that is a tier 2 commercial edible food generator, and they need help. So I think there'll be that kind of collaboration and feedback loop that happens. I hope that answers your questions, Virginia. Next question.
Our next question is from Karen. Karen, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and please state your affiliation.
Yeah, this is Karen Gisable from the city of Sunnyvale. Kind of a simple question. You may have already answered it. We're working with our county on them developing a website. I'm assuming the website can be at the county level and it doesn't have to be at the jurisdiction level. Is that correct?
That is a great question, sort of. So while you can have, I know, there's always a sort of. So while you can have one list that all of the jurisdictions are able to link to, it is important that that list makes it clear that, Karen, for the generators, commercial edible food generators in Sunnyvale, they know and can clearly see who are the organization services that would serve them in Sunnyvale. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But we're seeing a lot of counties and individual jurisdictions collaborating in that way, because I think it's a lot easier to kind of maintain the list in by one entity or person, and then everyone links to it, and then you identify Sunnyvale, these are who services us. So I think it's a great use of resources, much more efficient.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks.
The next question is from Nam. Please unmute yourself to ask your question and state your affiliation.
Hi, my name is Nam. I'm from LA County Public Works. And my question is CalRecycle aware of any small-scale organic processing facilities currently operating, specifically any in Southern California?
Hey, Nam, right now, because we're talking about edible food, is it okay if we come back to that when we, talk about collections? And also, what I'd like to do is have our Cerritos land staff follow up with you on that specific question, because we can kind of have that conversation. And there are a lot We've had conversations with Kobe Sky and his team, making some introductions to also facilities that want to come into the county. So there's a lot happening. So we could have a follow-up conversation. Is that okay?
Thank you very much.
So it doesn't look like we have any more questions coming in. We have scheduled till 10 o'clock to talk about edible food. I'll give it another minute or two for us to see if anything comes in. If not, we can always take a break since I know this webinar is quite long. Let's see, are there any other questions? We also, as a reminder, have our enforcement team here.
Ashley, I think Luke has a question.
Luke, you can go ahead and unmute yourself to ask your question.
Sorry, this is just one of those follow-up because we're talking about jurisdictions. So to kind of go with the fact that the county would be responsible for collecting and reporting data for as a jurisdiction, but on behalf of other jurisdictions within the county, is that correct? I'm trying to determine if an incorporated city would be considered its own jurisdiction and the unincorporated areas would be included as one county jurisdiction.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm sorry if I wasn't clear on that in the presentation. I was trying to consolidate and go fast. So for edible food programs as well as edible food capacity, jurisdictions are defined as the county unincorporated area, individual incorporated cities, any special districts that provide solid waste collection services that are located within the county, and if there are any regional agencies located within the county. So that's kind of what we're talking about when we, not kind of, that is what we're talking about when we refer to jurisdictions. So when it comes to capacity planning, each of those individual entities, so county unincorporated area, each incorporated city, if there's a special district that provides solid waste collection services, need to be doing their calculations, you know, compiling their data, and coming up with, you know, what do they know to be their verified existing, new, and planned, both organic waste and edible food capacity. And then that gets rolled up into one big number for the entire county when that data is the county submits their report. And that's why I talked about, I think it's so important for the county and the individual jurisdictions to begin starting to talk about how can we divvy up all of the tasks that need to happen related to capacity planning and creating kind of an implementation plan and timeline. I think it's a more efficient way so that everyone is not going to the same edible food recovery organization to collect data, right? One of you can go get that data from that organization. Another one might go get the data from this, you know, service, et cetera. So I think that collaboration is really important. And we have been holding trainings around the state with counties and their jurisdictions to dig in to what's required for organic waste and edible food recovery capacity planning. And if you ever have that interest, please contact your local assistance market development liaison and we'll get that training scheduled. Thus far, the feedback has been really positive. I think folks have really appreciated understanding and being able to dig in. And I am really excited about the capacity planning tools that CalRecycle has coming very soon. We've been working hard on the Tier 1, Tier 2 commercial edible food identification guidance. We've come up with some really great strategies on efficient ways to identify your generators. We brought a lot of clarity into this space about, you know, how do you find out if a supermarket meets the definition or not? I think that the work that we've done, we've had stakeholders from across the state working with us on this. They kind of jumped into the water early and learned a lot of lessons. And as a result, we've really been able to develop an efficient and effective approach that we're going to continue updating as we learn more. That guidance will come out in March. We're going to have a subsequent webinar and conversation about that. We also have, I mentioned the survey tool. We heard from a lot of jurisdictions that they were like how do we even start the conversation with our edible food recovery organizations and services? Like, how do I organize this and how do I start the conversation? So this survey tool, if you're in that situation, it's going to be really helpful for gathering information and starting to establish that relationship with food recovery organizations and services. And then following right behind that are capacity planning tools, our calculators, and our guidance. And I'm really excited. That'll be coming out in April. We'll have a statewide webinar to train folks on utilizing those tools, answer questions, and help you. And then with all that said, you have your local assistance liaison who is boots on the ground and can help you. They can field specific questions to our 1383 team. So there's a lot of resources to support you. And I just lastly want to say, when it comes to capacity planning, we know that this first go around, we are all learning. And so we know that maybe those estimates are going to be rough, but the important thing is that we start planning for capacity. We start having these conversations with those folks that are going to be an important, play an important role in helping us to achieve these goals. So it's new, and I appreciate the newness, and it can be hard to get started, but we really are your partner in this and want to help you in any way that we can. And also, if there's other tools that you need, we're happy to work on those.
We have a question from Monica. Monica, you are now unmuted. Please unmute yourself to ask your question.
Hi, everyone. So just quickly, I have been understanding there are some jurisdictions that have questions regarding agencies that would be under enforcement of the state. So for example, a school district that owns its own property that a city or county would not have enforcement over. How does CalRecycle envision the communication or compliance aspects of edible food or potentially other SB 1383 requirements happening over those agencies? Like, what does the communication look like if a city notices that the school is out of compliance? What do we sort of expect from that situation?
I'll start, Ashley, and if you want to add, and I don't know if you want.
Yeah, Alan and Trisha, do you want to chime in first, and then Karen and I could add?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, what I was going to add was that if the jurisdiction did see that there was, a school that was out of compliance, they would want to contact people. They would try to contact the school and see if they couldn't provide some sort of assistance to help them get into compliance. And then if not, they would, if they were unable to get them to comply, they would contact the department. Kara, do you want to add to that, or Alan?
Yeah, there's a couple of, I think, Monica, just within your statement, there's a couple of nuances there that I'm trying to wrap my head. There's a couple of scenarios in there. The enforcement action, on the jurisdiction taking upon within their jurisdiction begins 2024. So, it kind of really depends on, where we're at in the timeline as well. Similar to what Trisha said, in regards to prior to 2024 and the jurisdiction working with, all of their businesses, schools, their local and non-local entities in there, providing that assistance to ensure that they're set up for success, for complying with the jurisdiction's program for compliance with 1383. I think there's a question of the communication working between the local agencies, health departments and city enforcement. CalRecycle, does have the authority, when we go in there, and obviously, the department will be taking a compliance assistance first and utilizing discretion. But again, I guess a little bit more clarity. Kara, do you understand that question a little differently than how I'm reading it? And maybe you want to add to that?
No, I think you're spot on. Monica, thanks for the question. I think bottom line is in the coming year, we are going to be developing our enforcement process. We're going to be developing how we coordinate with jurisdictions when there is an issue, particularly with what you're referring to as a local education agency. So I think mostly I would say stay tuned as we develop I think it's going to be important that CalRecycle is communicating with the jurisdictions, particularly on their efforts, and we also, will be developing a process such that, as Tricia mentioned, if a jurisdiction does learn of a situation with a non-local entity or local education agency where they appear to be out of compliance, we're going to want to create a feedback system so jurisdictions can inform CalRecycle so that we can follow up and take action if needed. So we're starting to begin developing what that process looks like. Did that help, Monica?
It helps a little bit. And I will say thank you for recognizing the nuances in this situation, because as we start working with a lot of jurisdictions, it is the nuances that are getting people tripped up. So there are examples all over the state of, say, schools that are not in compliance with 1826 or 341, and callers or jurisdictions are struggling to get them into compliance. And then we're noting that we're going to have these additional regulations set on top of them. And it's really been tough to try and understand how do we encourage these guys to get in there. So I guess part of it is looking at is it the land representatives that could go in there and start talking or sooner than later, or how is this going to work? Because I'm getting a lot of questions about it right now.
We would love to have a follow-up conversation with you, but in general, right now, if we have that situation in a school or another non-local entity, they really should inform their land representative, because we will engage. We've had a lot of success to date where the jurisdiction, with respect to the existing mandatory commercial recycling laws, where the jurisdiction has brought us into the conversation, we've been able to get traction. 2022, CalRecycle will begin conducting compliance evaluations. We haven't developed yet, what the schedule will be, how many local education agencies will review in a year, or non-local entities, but you can bet we will be conducting compliance evaluations of those entities. So I think that's going to be helpful, because as those entities, start hearing, hey, CalRecycle is actually out here conducting an evaluation, word's going to spread. So I think that's going to be helpful. But for now, please contact your land liaison. We will engage with that local education agency, that school, for example, or school district, and really help in that respect. Did that help, Monica?
And Monica,
yeah,
just
that's perfect.
This is Ashley. So as you know, in the regulations, there is an enforcement process that CalRecycle has for the local education agencies and non-local entities. So if it does get to that far, or if we have to go down that route, we will. And then there would be that non-compliance list that they would go on to if we found them to be non-compliant. So after all of the action, after all the education and outreach, we do have a process for those type of violators if they're still in violation of 1383.
Okay, that's awesome, you guys. Thank you. That's what we needed to hear.
And I think, for Chris's next question, Chris, if you're talking about basically Monica's question, so our oversight for the local education agencies and the non-local entities is anything in 1383. So when you look at the enforcement article, I think it's Article 15 in SB 1383, it talks about violations of anything in the chapter of SB 1383. So I hope that helps.
And Ashley, this is Julia here. We have no other questions, so just letting you know.
Perfect. So I don't see anything else right now. As a reminder, we do have HF&H on the line, our enforcement compliance team. We will get to procurement and collections if you just hold those questions. I'm not seeing anything else. So how about we take a quick 5-minute break and we will start promptly at 10 o'clock. So thank you all. If you just mute and turn off your webcams for now for the panelists, and we will see you here at 10 o'clock. Okay, folks, it is 10 o'clock. So Scott, Michelle, Kristen, Tim, if you're ready, let's kick off your presentation.
Perfect. Thank you, Ashley. Maybe for ease, I'll keep my webcam off. But good morning. My name is Michelle Dewey, and on screen as well, you might see Scott Beckner. We are both, as well as with Tim Hall and Kristen Pidcock, we are some of the procurement team helping with the implementation of the procurement requirements outlined in SB 1383. Today, I'll be giving you a pretty brief, quick overview of the procurement requirements outlined in the SB 1383 regulations. We did want to leave the bulk of today's session open for Q&A, so this slideshow is a bit condensed, so bear with us. But if you do need further information on the procurement requirements or further education on this, please do feel free to check out our webpage and contact us with any questions, and hopefully that can help further your understanding, and we can help answer further questions you have. The procurement requirements are designed to help build the markets for products coming out of organics recycling facilities and to help close the loop on recovering and using the organic waste that is diverted as a result of SB 1383. Today, I'll be covering two distinct procurement requirements for jurisdictions: to procure recovered organic waste products and recycled content paper. Next slide, please. First, I'll talk about recovered organic waste products. These are shown here and include mulch, compost, energy products from anaerobic digestion, which include transportation fuel, electricity, or gas for heat, and electricity from biomass conversion. The regulations do outline specific details as to what makes these products eligible for procurement, but the key is that these products are from California landfill diverted organic waste, and that they are made at specific types of facilities or operations outlined in the regulations. Jurisdictions are required to procure these products, and for this procurement, jurisdictions are defined as cities, counties, or cities and counties. So how much of these products do cities and counties need to procure? CalRecycle will assign an annual procurement target to each jurisdiction based on their population. The formula you see here is from the regulations and demonstrates how a jurisdiction's procurement target is calculated and how conversion factors are then used to convert this target into quantities of end products. A jurisdiction's population is multiplied by a per capita procurement target defined in the regulations as 0.08 tons of organic waste per person, and the result is the jurisdiction's procurement target measured in tons of organic waste. Every 5 years, this target will be recalculated to account for changes in a jurisdiction's population. The regulations outline conversion factors that will then be used to convert each jurisdiction's procurement targets into quantities of recovered organic waste products. So to determine this quantity of end products, a jurisdiction would multiply their target by these conversion factors. We built in multiple options into the procurement requirements to provide jurisdictions with flexibility in meeting their procurement target. And in keeping with this theme, jurisdictions can customize their procurement and can choose what mix of these products they'd like to procure to meet their target. So they can meet their target entirely through one product or through a mix of products. Next slide. This slide further highlights some of those options and flexibility built into the regulations. The first is that jurisdictions can meet their target either through direct procurement, in which the jurisdiction is directly obtaining and using the products themselves or giving it away, or through a direct service provider, in which the jurisdiction has a written agreement or contract with another entity to procure and use those products on behalf of the jurisdiction. So an example of this might be a jurisdiction having a contract with a landscaper to use eligible mulch and compost products on behalf of the jurisdiction, and this, if outlined in their agreement as such, can count towards the jurisdiction's procurement target. A couple of important things to emphasize and that we get questions on a lot is, does this mean that we have to purchase products? And procurement does not necessarily mean purchase. A jurisdiction that produces its own eligible products or receives it in another way, such as free delivery of compost through their hauler may use these products and can use these towards their procurement target. It's also important to note that procurement can be what we call a paper transaction. So the products procured do not have to be produced within the actual jurisdiction, made from their own collected organic waste, or even used within the jurisdiction. So a jurisdiction can purchase eligible compost, for example, from anywhere in the state, and they could use this towards their procurement target. Lastly, CalRecycle has built a mechanism into the regulations where the target, their procurement target can be lowered to ensure that they do not have to procure more products than they actually have a need for. This mechanism is triggered by a jurisdiction as part of their annual report and can be supported by their previous year's procurement of energy products, including fuel, electricity, or gas used for heating. So if their previous year's procurement of these energy products is lower than their calculated procurement target, this can be used to support a lowered target. Next slide. This slide shows just a few examples of how a jurisdiction may use these products to meet their goal. The regulations don't specify specific end uses and ways to use these products. However, this is what we may commonly see for use of these products. Compost or mulch may be used in city parks or gardens for erosion control measures. A jurisdiction could also host compost or mulch giveaways, and this can count towards their target. Transportation fuel from renewable gas may be used to fuel a jurisdiction's own buses or waste fleets, or if they have a direct service provider relationship with an entity such as their contracted waste hauler, this entity using this fuel could be on behalf of the jurisdiction and could count towards their target. A jurisdiction can also use gas used for heating for any of their needs, such as on-site heating or cooking, or to heat their equipment, such as the digesters themselves. Electricity from biomass conversion or from renewable gas from anaerobic digestion may be used to power any needs, such as on-site needs at the organics recycling facility itself, or really any other buildings or infrastructure used by the jurisdiction or their direct service providers. Next slide, please. Jurisdictions are required to maintain records so that CalRecycle can verify compliance as needed. These records include information of the entities from whom products were procured, a general description of how products are used, and invoices and other similar records of procurement from the jurisdiction and their direct service providers. Please note that there are additional record-keeping requirements outlined in the regulations for certain products, including mulch, energy products from wastewater treatment facilities, or from biomass conversion facilities. The second part of the requirements are for the procurement of recycled content paper. And it's important to emphasize that these are entirely separate from the procurement requirements discussed so far. Different from the procurement requirements previously discussed, this is a blanket requirement for all paper purchases. So there is no target of how much of these products need to be purchased. Rather, all purchases of these defined products need to meet these requirements. And these also do include a broader scope of jurisdictions. Rather than just cities, counties, or cities and counties, special districts that provide solid waste collection services are also included in the scope of these regulations. SB 1383 does build upon existing requirements which many local entities already meet, such as for minimum recycled content in their paper purchases. However, it does add on a couple of new requirements. The first is that paper purchases must be recyclable under the Federal Trade Commission guidance. And this is meaning that a substantial majority of the population where these paper products are sold do have access to recycling programs so that this product has access to recycling at the end of its useful life. And this is to help further avoid landfill disposal of these products and to support the goals of SB 1383 for landfill diversion. Jurisdictions must also require vendors from whom they purchase these products to provide certifications of the post-consumer content and that these products are recyclable. And there are a variety of products covered in the regulations under these, but paper purchases does include paper products and printing and writing paper. So this includes a wide range of products, including paper janitorial supplies, cartons, packaging, file folders, envelopes, and most printing and writing paper. Next slide. And there are also record-keeping requirements for this set of the requirements so that CalRecycle can verify compliance. These records include copies of invoices, receipts, or other proof of purchase describing procurement of these paper purchases, and copies of those certifications from vendors that documents the post-consumer recycled content and that documents that these products meet the recyclability claim guidelines. Next slide, please. This slide gives a brief timeline for SB 1383 implementation, and you'll notice here in red are some of the important dates for procurement. You'll notice procurement requirements do become enforceable in 2022 with the rest of the regulations. Rural counties and jurisdictions located within rural counties that are exempt from the organic waste collection requirements will not be required to comply with the recovered organic waste product procurement requirements until 2027. However, please note that all entities, including rural jurisdictions, will be required to comply with the recycled content paper procurement requirements in 2022. Jurisdictions will be informed annually of their procurement targets through CalRecycle's website and through direct written notification from CalRecycle. The official procurement targets for 2022 will be taking into account newer population data than is currently available. However, we do expect this population data to be available in May of this year, and so CalRecycle will be planning to provide notice to jurisdictions of their official procurement targets following the release of this data. And please note again that the procurement target for jurisdictions are recalculated every 5 years to account for changes in populations. So the procurement target for the year of 2022 will be in effect for 5 years until 2027. Next slide, thank you. There are also requirements included in Article 13 of the regulations for jurisdictions to report to CalRecycle. If jurisdictions are procuring mulch, there is a one-time initial compliance report due in April of 2022. And this is the only instance of reporting that is outside of the annual reports for the purposes of procurement. And so if a jurisdiction is planning to procure mulch, the regulations do outline that a ordinance or other enforceable mechanism is adopted by the jurisdiction that the mulch procured must meet various requirements. So that would need to be reported as part of this initial compliance report. However, all other reporting will be covered in the annual reporting, and it is outlined here what will be encompassed in that. It is the amount of each product that's procured in the previous calendar year will need to be reported, and then if a jurisdiction is planning on implementing a reduced procurement target, they would need to also report the previous year's procurement of those energy products. And so you'll notice the reporting requirements are fairly minimal, and it's mostly the record-keeping requirements for procurement where jurisdictions will be focusing a lot of their efforts. Next slide, please. Lastly, this slide highlights some of the tools and resources that are currently available to help jurisdictions implement the procurement requirements. The procurement calculator tool was recently released on our website and through our listserv and can be used by jurisdictions to help calculate their procurement targets and the quantities of recovered organic waste products that they would need to procure to meet this target. This may be helpful for jurisdictions in planning for their procurement and tracking their progress towards meeting their target. We will be hosting a webinar on this tool next week on February 9th from 2 to 3 p.m. It will be recorded in case you miss it, but please reach out to the SLCP inbox if you would like a link to register for this webinar. The model procurement policy is also another tool available on our website and developed with HF&H consultants. This is an optional customizable template that jurisdictions may use if they're planning to develop and adopt a procurement policy, and can be one resource that may be helpful for jurisdictions in implementing these requirements. We also have a variety of other resources on our website, including case studies and FAQs that we are frequently updating and wanting to keep current with new questions we get coming in. So please do check out those resources online, and we will be continually adding to those FAQ resources and webpage resources. So please do continue to submit your questions to us through the SLCP inbox. And if you would like to see any other resources highlighted on our website, please do feel free to reach out with those suggestions. Next slide. Next slide. Awesome. Well, that is it for my presentation. As noted, please do be sure you're signed up for our SLCP inbox, our listserv if you're not already, to stay up to date on all future procurement tools and developments. And this presentation was a fairly quick overview, but if you do need further information, as noted, please do check out our webpage and contact us with any questions, and stay in touch. Thanks so much.
Bear with me here. There you go. I was having a hard time finding my unmute. Thanks, Michelle, for that presentation. This is a honed down version of a 45-minute or so presentation with a lot more detail. So we're hoping that most of you have seen one of those presentations from us or from HF&H. So we are really excited for this opportunity to hear from Central Valley stakeholders, and I'm certain there will be a number of out-of-the-box scenarios and questions with a lot of nuance that we haven't considered. So we may need to take many of these questions offline and get back to you at a later date. If so, we may ask you to provide more detail in a follow-up email. We're also harvesting content from today's Q&A and from all these webinars to improve our future webinars, websites, and trainings. We want to be as helpful as possible, and these Q&A opportunities are critical to that effort, and we're excited to take questions. I also want to reemphasize that we are hosting a webinar on the procurement calculator February 9th, 2 to 3 p.m., as Michelle just said. We're excited to get that out there because we think it'll be really helpful for jurisdictions. And so for today's Q&A session on procurement, just a reminder, we can't address the merits or reasoning behind the language that is in the regulations, but we will focus on implementation and clarification questions. And before we open the floor, I'm going to hand it back to Michelle to touch on a number of the most frequently asked questions we regularly address and we get in just about every opportunity to speak that we attend. And these and many more are covered in the FAQ section of CalRecycle's SLCP website. So I highly recommend visiting the FAQ section. And if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to our SLCP email, which I believe is on the screen. Yep. So Michelle.
Awesome. Thank you, Scott. And yes, we saw this as a great opportunity to open up the floor with some of these frequently, commonly asked questions, and hopefully address some of your questions off the bat, and hopefully to guide some of your further questions as well. So one question we get a lot is how can a jurisdiction meet their procurement target? We get situational questions such as, can we sell a product to meet our target? Can we an entity in our area is producing an eligible product, can that production count towards our target? Or our organic waste is going towards, such as a composting facility that is producing these products, eligible products, could us sending our organic waste, can that count towards our target? So the regulations do outline that procurement is achieved through the end use or giveaway of products. It is limited to that use or giveaway of products. So it does not include the sale of products or simply the production of products, or that a jurisdiction's waste is going towards production. That is not quite closing the loop all the way. The intent is encouraging the demand and use of these products, as this is where the most of the environmental benefits are realized. So they're just procuring, obtaining a product, and then reselling it, or just producing a product is not quite enough, but actually providing that end use or giveaway is what will help support that demand and support the markets for the use of these products. So that's one important one we get quite a lot. Another is, if there is, an entity in our area that is using eligible products, can that count towards our target? So for example, our local waste hauler fuels its trucks with eligible transportation fuel derived from renewable gas. Can this count towards our jurisdiction's procurement target? And this certainly could be eligible. However, there does need to be a written agreement or contract in place defining this direct service provider relationship between the jurisdiction and that end user. Without that written agreement and relationship, those external entities wouldn't be considered part of the jurisdiction, and so that procurement would not count towards the jurisdiction's procurement target. But there is that option with the direct service provider relationship. We also get the question of what if a product a jurisdiction procures is partially eligible? So if it's partially produced from landfill diverted organic waste, or or if we're, for example, if electricity is being purchased and it's part of that electricity is from eligible sources, from eligible facilities, or if those facilities themselves are receiving some eligible feedstocks, but are also receiving other feedstocks that may not be landfill diverted organic waste. So how can this be prorated, and how can these products count towards a target if it's sort of partially eligible? So the regulations do outline that products that can meet a jurisdiction's procurement target do need to meet the definition of a recovered organic waste products, so that they are from California landfill diverted organic waste, and that they are produced at specific permitted or otherwise authorized facilities or operations. So if a product, there's a lot of important nitty-gritty details, of course, to look to when providing guidance. But overall, if it would just be the portion of a
I think Michelle has
Yeah, looks like,
frozen.
yep. Michelle, if you can hear me, I would just turn off your webcam to save bandwidth. There you go.
Michelle, can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me?
There,
We
yes,
can.
perfect.
Can you start that one
Perfect.
over, please?
Yeah, so sorry
you.
about that. Would you like me to start from the top of that question?
Yes, please.
Thanks so much. I apologize for that. So one question we frequently get is, what if we are interested in purchasing or procuring a product that is, partially eligible? So if it's partially from eligible landfill diverted organic waste, or if it's a mix that might be sourced from some eligible facilities or sources. So an example of this might be that if electricity is purchased and some of that grid mix is from eligible facilities, or if or if a biomass diversion facility that is producing electricity and that's part of the grid mix, or what if if they are receiving some eligible landfill diverted organic waste, but they may also be receiving other materials that are not landfill diverted. So how can this be taken into account if a product is mixed or blended and is not fully produced from diverted organics? So the important part is that products that can count towards a jurisdiction's procurement targets do meet the definition of a recovered organic waste product, and that is that they are produced from California landfill diverted organic waste, at permitted or otherwise authorized operations or facilities. And so there are a lot of important nitty-gritties that we would want to look to when assessing product eligibility. But in general, it is the portion of a product that would meet this definition of a recovered organic waste product that is made from recovered organic waste. It's that portion that can count towards a target. But we do look forward to if you have some specific product examples that you'd like us to dive into. And some other questions that we frequently get is, under what circumstances can mulch count towards a jurisdiction's procurement target? So mulch is an eligible product, but there are a variety of requirements outlined in the regulations, such as that the mulch is produced at specific permitted facilities, and that it does comply with land application standards. And the requirement that it is produced at these specific facilities is to emphasize that these products are helping to support the landfill diversion goals of SB 1383, and that they are being made from this diverted solid waste. So you'll notice in our regulations that chipping and grinding facilities or operations are excluded from being able to produce mulch that's eligible for procurement. And these are excluded because the feedstocks typically entering these facilities is not typically landfilled. So it does not support the landfill diversion goals of SB 1383. And we do address this a little bit more on our FAQs online, but it goes into how chipping and grinding facilities are defined, that they do accept green material, which is defined as being separated from the solid waste stream. So that's a little bit more background on that. And I'll go over one last question. We frequently get the question as well as, under what circumstances can gas produced from a POTW, from a publicly owned treatment work, wastewater treatment facility, under what circumstances can that gas count towards a jurisdiction's procurement target? And there are a variety of requirements outlined in the regulations, but the key is that this renewable gas is produced from landfill diverted organic waste. So this wastewater treatment facility would need to be accepting eligible diverted organics from specific permitted solid waste facilities or operations, and the portion of the gas produced from those diverted organics is what may count towards a jurisdiction's procurement target. So those are just some really brief, hopefully helpful, frequently asked questions we get that will hopefully off the bat assist with some of your questions you may have, or get you thinking on some other questions. And thank you so much. And we'll now open it up. I'll pass it over to Julia to cover to open it up for Q&A. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Scott and Michelle. So I'll cover the instructions really briefly for the Q&A session for those who just tuned in for the procurement session. So to ask a question, just type your question into the question pane. CalRecycle staff will unmute participants in the order that questions have come in. You must unmute yourself on your end when asked to by a CalRecycle staff member. We will try to get to as many different people as possible and all of the questions. We will respond to questions or clarification regarding implementation and tools only. And as Scott mentioned, if we cannot respond to your question today or do not get to your question today, we will follow up with you at a later date. So I think the first question we have, Scott is going to read off. So Scott, I'll hand it back to you really quick.
Surely. We got this via an email, and the question is essentially, can a jurisdiction give or sell their 1383 product to a broker so that they can resell it for use elsewhere? In the spirit of the law, this would be new consumption of RNG replacing diesel. So they work solely with transportation fuel, so the RNG would stay in the transportation sector. This is a great question and a great example of one that we'd love to discuss further offline with this particular person, and we will build additional FAQ and content around this kind of example. In general, the relevant parts of regulation that will come into play for this example are record keeping and potentially a direct service provider requirements. Great. So we do have a number of questions that we have been asked that we've answered in the Q&A, but I think that our practice is to still open that up for the person to ask it. Or Julia, do you want me to just read the question and read our answer and then?
We can have the folks unmute themselves to ask their question if they're still here, and then you can respond using the answer that you provided. So we will start first with Stephen Carter. One sec while I unmute you. Okay, Stephen, you are unmuted. Please go ahead and unmute yourself to ask your question. He's still with us. So Stephen's question is, does electricity, is Stephen here? Okay, sorry, I'm getting some feedback. So the question is, does electricity from renewable gas created from a landfill gas to energy unit qualify as recovered organic waste product?
All right, and the answer to that is no. The energy produced from landfill gas is not eligible for 1383's procurement requirements. See the Public Resources Code, Article 12. It's 18993.1F for a full list of the sources. But Michelle also went over that after that question came in, so hopefully it answered Stephen's question. Essentially, we're creating. Procurement is creating demand for products made from landfill diverted wastes, and since landfill gas is not from landfill diverted wastes, it's not eligible for these purposes.
Thank you, Scott. So our next question is from Jennifer Hernandez. Jennifer, you can go ahead and unmute yourself to ask your question. Okay, I will ask Jennifer's question. Her question is, can grass cycling count as procurement if we are able to determine the amount of grass being left after regular maintenance?
Okay, and so grass cycling is an example of one of many meritorious practices and ways of addressing overall 1383 goals. However, for the purposes of the regulations and for procurement in general, you have to review the list in PRC 18993.1F, which is limited to compost, mulch, and miscellaneous energy products, and the requirements within those specify where the sources, eligible sources for those materials, and grass cycling is not one of them.
Thank you, Scott. So Jennifer's next question is, can mulch created from local tree trimming services be utilized to meet this requirement?
This is one of those devils in the details kind of things. Definitely review the mulch section of the, I'm not going to say the PRC code again. It's the mulch must be produced at an eligible specified facility within regulations, and so if the mulch is produced at one of those facilities and it's not produced directly by the jurisdiction, then that brings into play the direct service provider language in regulations and requirements therein. So if you have specific questions or subtleties within that scenario that you'd like to discuss, feel free to reach out.
Thank you, Scott. So our next question is from Lane. Lane, you can go ahead and unmute yourself to ask your question.
Yeah, hold on.
Gotcha.
There, I think I'm unmuted. Okay, great.
Yes.
My company produces compost made out of diverted organic waste products, and it seems like a jurisdiction is the one who has to procure. And my question was, if you have a private entity within a jurisdiction procuring compost made from these diverted organic waste, can that count towards a jurisdiction's procurement requirement?
Michelle, it looks like you provided an answer that you want to jump in.
Sure. Thanks, Scott, and thank you for your question, Lane. So jurisdictions are required to undertake this procurement. So entities that, even if they are located within, the jurisdiction's area, if they are not part of the jurisdiction, such as their departments or divisions, they would not be considered part of the jurisdiction, and their procurement would not count towards that jurisdiction's procurement target. However, if an entity such as a farmer is interested in procuring eligible products and the jurisdiction does have an established contracted written direct service provider relationship with the farmer as an end user and to procure this product on behalf of the jurisdiction, that can certainly count towards the jurisdiction's target. But it would need to go through that direct service provider relationship pathway.
Yeah, it's pretty open-ended. The direct service provider language and regulations provides a lot of flexibility for out-of-the-box thinking, and we're really excited to see all these really interesting scenarios popping up that are going to utilize that functionality within the regulations. But all the other requirements still have to be met in terms of record keeping and reporting, and then the direct service provider requirements in and of themselves. So definitely review that, and if you have subtleties that you'd like to discuss further, feel free to reach out.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so our next question is from Stephen Carter. Stephen, if you're here, you can unmute yourself to ask your question. Okay, so I'll ask his question for him. We have a contractor on site at our landfill performing a chipping grinding operation. The organic material being processed into mulch would be landfilled on site if it didn't go through the grinding operation. Is this mulch eligible to be counted as procurement?
Great. Michelle, if you have an answer ready to that, feel free to jump in. Otherwise, the mulch, chipping and grinding, well, the mulch requirements and regulations stipulate specific permitting that is needed for that to be eligible, along with the ordinance requirements. So all I can say there is if the requirements are met within regulations for the specific permit and the ordinance is in place and record keeping can be arranged and all the record keeping requirements are met, it could count, but it depends on the details, and feel free to reach out with the more subtleties and nuance if you have them.
All right, so our next question is from Luke. Luke, you can go ahead and unmute yourself to ask your question.
So I'm trying to figure out where gasification of organic material fits into the procurement, if that gasification process is being done in a jurisdiction by a county entity.
Great question. A few things. First, I want to re-emphasize that the procurement, the recovered organic waste product does not have to be made within the jurisdiction claiming it. It can be anywhere in the state from California-derived materials. So that's hopefully good news. In addition, gasification could serve a role if it meets the biomass definition that's referenced in regs. Let me get you the specific language here. And for future webinars, I should probably be able to pull up the regulations and show you themselves. But electricity from biomass conversion is one of the eligible sources. So biomass conversion is a specific facility type outlined in other statute. And so if the requirements are met to be considered biomass, which is really reliant, it's technology neutral, but reliant on very specific limited feedstocks. If those requirements are met and a direct service provider or if jurisdiction is procuring that directly or through a direct service provider relationship, that could count towards procurement. Again, as long as all of the requirements are met.
So it goes back to what you were saying, or what the previous speaker was talking about, is that it's the end use that's provided as much as it is the actual production of it.
Correct. Yep.
Okay, so our next question is from Michael. One moment while I unmute you. Okay, Michael, you are unmuted. You may go ahead and unmute yourself to ask your question. Okay, so I will state Michael's question / comment. So I believe this is going back to the use of mulch. So we must transport tree debris to a permitted facility to have it transported back. And so it's kind of a question and comment.
Okay. Yeah. So, the procurement requirements are intended to create some market demand for some specific products. We're not precluding anything else from happening in the jurisdiction. Just that only the things outlined in regulations can count towards a jurisdiction's procurement target. And so I hear your comment, and hopefully my answer will suffice at this time.
Thank you, Scott. So I'm going to jump over to a question that we received via email. So the question is, we are a high desert community, so there is limited use for compost and mulch. What happens if we are able to lower our target based upon our energy / fuel use in the previous year, and we do not have access to procure any renewable gas or electricity from biomass? And because we are in a high desert area, we do not have the ability to procure all of the compost and mulch to meet our target, which will be approximately 1,000 tons per year. What will happen if we can only procure through use or give away a portion of compost or mulch?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I'm not sure if I have an answer to that. We have this mechanism within regs to set an alternate target, which you referenced. And then I can't really speak to how enforcement will be implemented for specific situations. I don't know if anybody else wants to jump in there from enforcement team or Kara or anybody else, but we'd be happy to speak offline about your concerns and your specific scenario, and see if there are a little bit more information we can get from you.
Alan, did you want to jump in, or you want me to jump in first?
Go ahead, Kara, and then I could add anything if I'm sure that you're not going to miss, but I could touch base after you.
Excellent. So I really appreciate the question. I do think that in some jurisdictions, like high desert communities, there will be challenges. And so we'd really like to work with you individually to explore what those challenges are, see if there are ways to overcome it. This is intended to drive markets. So what you may consider now as not being able to do, if we can explore with you, there could be opportunities such as through your direct service providers that you may not have thought of. If for some reason we get to the end of that road and you truly cannot meet your target, then as we conduct a compliance evaluation of your procurement efforts, we would take all of that into consideration. But first and foremost, we would want to explore all opportunities with you. And this is new for many jurisdictions. And so we want to be able to provide you assistance on your specific situation. And it may lead, we may learn some things from some of the high desert communities that we can share with other high desert communities. Alan, anything you want to add?
Yeah, no, I think, Carrie, you hit it there in regards to the department will be working with the jurisdictions to provide that assistance to ensure that they are meeting the requirements of 1383. Kara touched based on the compliance evaluation that the enforcement process begins with the compliance evaluation, and then through that, if the department does find that there are violations that are identified, then there's the NOV process which occurs, which is the NOV being issued, which then in turn the jurisdiction will have 90 days to correct. So the violations will be outlined and detailed within the NOV, and the time will be given for the jurisdiction to correct any deficiencies in that aspect, and that's the enforcement process. But as Kara was mentioning, there is the coordination that the department will be working with jurisdictions to ensure that they are set up for success in becoming compliant with 1383.
I also want to just add that I think it was covered in Michelle's presentation, but rural counties and cities within rural counties do have until January 1st, 2027 for the procurement of organic waste product purposes. So hopefully that helps if the said high desert community is a rural county or city within rural county.
All right, thank you so much. So I am not seeing any other procurement related questions in the questions pane. So just a reminder, if you do have questions, please type those in. We have until 11. So what I'm going to do right now.
Julia, do we do Steve's question?
Stephen Carter? Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, we did. Okay, so I do have a question. I'm going to actually jump back to the edible food topic. So Kara or Ashley, this is for you because right now we have no other procurement questions. So the question is from Ed McNair with the Defense Logistics Agency Distribution Center of San Joaquin. So his question is, please define commercial edible food generator. The term commercial edible food generator is being utilized throughout this presentation. Our agency only distributes edible food to our U.S. military services, therefore does not distribute in commerce. Is our agency subject to 1383 regulations and CalRecycle's enforcement actions since any edible food waste is not commercial?
Sure, I'll start, Ashley, and then you want to jump in? And maybe Alan.
Keep going by.
Oh yeah, gotcha. So first, thanks, Ed, for the question. So with respect to edible food recovery, federal facilities are not a tier 1 or tier 2 commercial edible food generator. So federal facilities are not required to comply with the edible food recovery requirements for tier 1 and tier 2 commercial edible food generators. With that said, we hope that federal facilities will voluntarily participate in edible food recovery because there's a tremendous amount of opportunity, particularly to recover edible food for service members located on base, et cetera. So that there is a huge need, but you are not subject to the requirements for edible food. However, federal facilities are subject to other 1383 requirements, in particularly with respect to the organic waste recovery requirements. So that's participating in recycling that organic waste. And federal facilities fall under what we call the non-local entity definition in the regulations. So if you look at the regs, wherever you see non-local entities, that means federal facilities. Finally, if you have any need for any technical assistance, please let us know. We would be happy to have one of our liaisons work with the distribution center in San Joaquin and explore as far as your organic waste recycling program. Ashley, anything you want to add?
I don't think so. I think you covered it all, but Ed is on the line. So if we could unmute Ed to see if if that helped.
Yeah, one moment. Okay, Ed, you're unmuted.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that feedback on those the question I had. Yeah, that clarified everything. So yeah, and like you were saying, yeah, we do make attempts to meet any type of recycling opportunities that come our way or that we find out there. So yeah, we are doing that. It's just I want to know if we fell under the regulatory jurisdictions of either CalRecycle or the Air District or any entity like that when it comes to compliance. And so, yeah, I understand that we have to still participate in the organic waste, and yeah, we do so very happily. So appreciate it. Thank you.
You bet.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ed. That was a great question, great clarifying question. I don't see any other questions coming in. Again, we have HF&H on the line, our enforcement compliance team. We will start collections at 11 o'clock. So if there are no other questions right now, let's take a 10-minute break until 11 o'clock, and then we will see you back at 11. Okay, folks, it is 11 o'clock. Kara, are you set to do your collections PowerPoint?
That's actually going to be me, Ashley.
Oh,
This is
sorry, Julia. Julia, are you set to do your collections PowerPoint?
And Kara's here to help answer questions.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
All right, so I will get started. My name is Julia Doloff. I work with Kara Morgan and Ashley Yee. I am part of our local assistance and market development branch, and I've been working on 1383 for quite a few years now. So today I'm going to provide a high-level overview of the collection requirements. So jurisdictions are required to provide an organic waste collection service to all residents and businesses. This is what we refer to as automatically providing service or universal service. The resident or business is automatically provided the service rather than having to subscribe to it. And the resident or business must participate in that service unless they have been granted a waiver by the jurisdiction. Jurisdictions can comply with the regulations by providing a 3+, 3, 2, or single unsegregated container service. They can also use a combination of services. A 3-container service requires the jurisdiction to provide each generator with a green, blue, and gray container. The green container is for the collection of organic waste only. The blue is for the collection of non-organic recyclables, but may include paper products, wood and dry lumber, and textiles. The gray container is for all other non-organic waste. A jurisdiction may provide additional containers or split containers for further source separation. And a jurisdiction may allow the use of plastic bags or compostable bags to collect food waste in the green container if the facilities the jurisdiction uses to recover the organic waste provides written notice to the jurisdiction that it can process or remove the plastic or compostable bags. In a 2-container collection service, a jurisdiction may either provide a green and a gray container or a gray and a blue container. Under a gray and a green container service, the green container is limited to organic waste only, and the gray container allows for the commingling of all other collected wastes. Under a blue and gray container service, the blue container is limited to traditional recyclables and may include paper products, wood and dry lumber, and textiles. The gray container is for all other collected waste. In both scenarios, the contents of the gray container must be sent to a high diversion organic waste processing facility. In an unsegregated single container collection service, a jurisdiction may provide a gray container that allows for the commingling of all collected waste. The contents of that gray container must be transported to a high diversion organic waste processing facility. CalRecycle will use RDRS data to identify these facilities, and this information will be provided to jurisdictions. If the high diversion facility that a jurisdiction is using has an organic content recovery rate less than the 50% required by 2022 or 75% required by 2025 for 2 consecutive quarterly reporting periods or 3 quarterly reporting periods within 3 years, that facility will no longer qualify as a high diversion organic waste processing facility. And there will be a notification process for the jurisdiction if that does happen. So if a jurisdiction is in violation due to its high diversion facility being out of compliance, the jurisdiction will be subject to the enforcement process. The jurisdiction must commit to one of 3 options in that situation: bringing the facility back into compliance, using a different high diversion facility, or the jurisdiction must implement a 3-container collection service. In a 3 and 2 container collection service, jurisdictions are required to monitor containers for contamination. Contamination monitoring must be done for residential and commercial routes. A jurisdiction can monitor contamination by conducting route reviews or waste evaluations. Jurisdictions that choose to conduct route reviews must review all hauler routes annually. Containers may be randomly selected along a hauler route, and cameras can be used to remotely monitor containers. Upon finding contaminants, the jurisdiction must notify the generator of the violation. Note that the regulations do not require a jurisdiction to impose administrative civil penalties on generators in violation of the container contaminants requirements. However, the regulations do allow jurisdictions to impose contamination processing fees or penalties for contamination. Waste evaluations are a facility-based container contamination compliance method. This is the alternative to conducting route reviews. Evaluations must be done at least twice per year and must occur in 2 distinct seasons. The evaluations must include samples of each container type, so all container colors, and the samples must be taken from different areas in the jurisdiction that are representative of the jurisdiction's waste stream. The regulations specify the minimum number of samples from all the hauler routes that must be included in the evaluation. If the sampled weight of container contaminants exceeds 25% of the measured sample for any container type, the jurisdiction must either notify generators on the sampled routes of the requirement to properly sort, or perform a targeted route review of containers on the sampled routes to determine the sources of contamination, and then notify those generators of their contamination to properly sort. Note that a jurisdiction that is implementing a performance-based source-separated collection service, as noted in Article 17, must conduct waste evaluations at least twice per year for the blue and green containers and once per quarter for the gray container. The regulations standardize container colors across the state. The color scheme is either the lid is the required color, or the body of the container is the required color, and the lid is also the required color, or gray, or black. A jurisdiction is not required to replace functional containers that do not comply with the color requirements prior to the end of the useful life of those containers, or prior to January 1, 2036, whichever comes first. If a container has minor repairs and remains functional, it does not need to be replaced prior to 2036. In 2022, a jurisdiction must place a label on each new container or new lid provided to generators. A jurisdiction must either place labels on the body or lid of the container with language, graphic images, or both that indicate the primary acceptable and prohibited materials for that container, or must provide imprinted text or graphic images on the container body or lid that indicate the primary acceptable and prohibited materials for that container. The labeling requirements apply to all containers, such as dumpsters, carts, debris bins, and roll-offs in the residential and commercial sectors. Organic waste generators must comply with local requirements by either subscribing to the organic waste collection service provided by the jurisdiction, or by self-hauling their organic waste in compliance with the regulations. Commercial businesses must provide containers for the collection of organic waste and non-organic recyclables in all areas where disposal containers are provided for customers except restrooms. Businesses must provide collection containers that conform to the colors of the jurisdiction service, or provide containers with the required labels. Businesses must prohibit employees from placing organic waste in the wrong container and must periodically inspect containers for contamination. Generators are allowed to manage their organic waste on site or use community-scale composting activities. Commercial businesses, including multifamily dwellings, must provide or arrange for organic waste collection services for employees, contractors, tenants, and customers. This includes supplying and allowing access to an adequate number, size, and location of containers with the required labels or colors. Businesses must annually provide information to employees, contractors, tenants, and customers about organic waste recovery requirements and properly sorting material, and must provide information to new tenants before or within 14 days of occupation of the premises. Businesses must provide access to their properties during inspections by the jurisdiction. The regulations allow jurisdictions to grant waivers to generators from the collection requirements. However, jurisdictions do not have to allow any or all of these waivers. And jurisdictions, not haulers, must administer these waivers. Waivers must be reviewed every 5 years by the jurisdiction. A jurisdiction may issue a de minimis waiver to a commercial business if the business is generating a de minimis amount of organic waste. De minimis amounts of waste are less than 20 gallons per week per applicable container for businesses that generate 2 cubic yards or more of total solid waste per week, and less than 10 gallons per week for businesses that generate less than 2 cubic yards of total solid waste per week. A jurisdiction may issue a physical space waiver to a commercial business or property owner if the jurisdiction has evidence demonstrating that the premises lack adequate space for any of the organic waste container configurations. Finally, a jurisdiction may provide a collection frequency waiver, which allows a generator to subscribe to biweekly collection of its blue, gray, or both containers if the generator is using a service that requires the placement of all organic waste in the green container. A jurisdiction may issue the collection frequency waiver for the entire jurisdiction, specific areas of the jurisdiction, or an entire neighborhood. A jurisdiction may apply to CalRecycle for a waiver for some or all of the collection requirements. A jurisdiction may apply for a low population waiver if the jurisdiction disposed of less than 5,000 tons of solid waste in 2014 and the jurisdiction has a total population of less than 7,500 people. Census tracts located in an unincorporated county with a population density of less than 75 people per square mile also qualify for a low population waiver. Low population waivers must be re-evaluated by the department every 5 years. CalRecycle must grant a rural exemption if a jurisdiction qualifies as a rural jurisdiction under AB 1826 and adopts a resolution finding that describes the purpose and need for the exemption. The duration of the rural exemption is December 31st, 2026. After that, jurisdictions may apply for the low population waivers if they meet the criteria. CalRecycle may grant an elevation waiver to a jurisdiction if the entire jurisdiction is located at or above an elevation of 4,500 feet. Census tracts located in the unincorporated county that are located at or above 4,500 feet may also apply for an elevation waiver. The census tracts may be partially located at the elevation. Elevation waivers exempt generators from the requirement to separate and recover food waste and food soiled paper. High elevation jurisdictions are not required to provide generators with containers. Those generators may continue to use their customer or hauler provided containers that fit into their bear boxes. CalRecycle will provide forms, guidance, and training in May or June so that jurisdictions can submit waiver requests starting in September. The regulations establish conditions under which disaster and emergency circumstance waivers to temporarily dispose of organic waste may be granted by the jurisdiction. A jurisdiction is not required to separate or recover organic waste removed from homeless encampments and illegal disposal sites. The regulations outline 3 requirements that must be met to allow a jurisdiction to dispose of quarantined organic waste. And these regulations do not require generators, jurisdictions, or other entities to manage or recover organic waste that federal law explicitly requires to be landfilled, such as solid waste from international flights. Counties and each city, regional agency, and special district that provide solid waste collection services within each county must plan for adequate capacity for recycling organic waste. Each county will lead this effort. The county is responsible for establishing a collaborative approach to planning, collecting organic waste recycling capacity planning information from each jurisdiction, submitting the organic waste recycling capacity report to CalRecycle, identifying any jurisdiction, including itself, that does not have enough capacity, and informing any jurisdiction that does not have enough capacity the timeline for submitting its implementation schedule to CalRecycle. Capacity planning efforts must include food, green waste, landscape and pruning waste, wood, paper products, digestate, and biosolids. And that concludes my presentation on the collection requirements. So we'll go to the Q&A session. I do apologize if I was cutting in and out. I'm seeing some comments about that. So if we need to repeat anything that was really bad, just let us know. So just really quickly, again, for those of you who just tuned in, just put your questions into the question pane. We will unmute you and let you know when to unmute yourself so you can ask your question. And with that, I will hand it over to Sarah Sanders for our first question.
We have a question from Luke. Luke, you are now unmuted. Please unmute yourself to ask your question. I'll go ahead and ask this question.
Sorry. My question was about the labels that needed to go on the cans. If those labels were only required for new lids or new cans, so existing ones that meet the conditions for being used until they need to be replaced do not need labels?
Hey, Luke, that's correct. Labels are only required on new containers.
The next question is from John. John, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. Go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, good, thank you. We're trying to understand the sampling requirements for our proposed program. It's based on the number of customers in a route. Let's say that for our route size, we need 40 samples twice a year to be done, but we have a 3-cart system, so I'm not clear if 40 samples are for each waste stream, 40 samples in total. If it's 40 samples, can it be divided amongst the 3 waste streams? We're trying to work this through with our franchise agreement and be clear with the hauler what their requirements are, but I think it's unclear what the number of samples are and if we get to choose which streams we do to meet this compliance. Thank you.
John, great question. I think what I'd like to do is if we could get your email, what I'd like to do is send you the guidance document that we have, so that the sampling, if you choose to do section C, which is the waste evaluation, that approach, which you do not have to do, you can do route reviews or waste evaluation sampling, it's your choice. That was based off LA City's waste evaluation protocol, and I do have a document that I can share with you that I think will answer your question. So if we can, oh, good, you put it in there. I'll follow up with you. Does that help, John?
Well, we'll see what the answer comes back as, but yes, we are looking to do route reviews rather than, the other like facility sampling. So we're just trying to be sure that we are clear with our requirements and our franchise agreements as to how we sample, what we're sampling, and making sure we're clear on that. So thank you.
Yeah, you bet. I will follow up. Off the top of my head, I believe it's each container, but let me look at that. I think, also from what we've heard, I think most jurisdictions are going to utilize the route review because many are already doing that, tagging cards, providing education, et cetera. The waste evaluation approach potentially could be a more expensive approach to take. So, unless a jurisdiction maybe is pursuing a performance-based collection service system, they may want to go with a route review, but we can certainly talk more about that. Thanks, John.
Thank you.
All right, so our next question is from Todd, and Todd is no longer with us in this webinar, so I'll read his question. Is there still a brown color requirement for food waste only carts? And the answer to that question is yes. If a jurisdiction is providing a separate container to collect food waste only, then the color for that container must be brown.
The next question is from Stephen. Stephen, you are unmuted. Please go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question. Okay, so Stephen's question is, does a transformation facility qualify as a high diversion organic waste processing facility?
So let me see if I got that question right, Sarah.
So this is Julia.
Oh, that was Julia. I'm sorry, Julia. Does a transformation facility, as defined in statute, qualify as a high diversion organic waste processing facility? Is that the question?
Yes, it looks like that's the question.
Okay, so I think first it's important to look at the regulations in the solid waste facility section of the regulations, which is Title 14. That provides the definition of high diversion organic waste processing facilities, as well as the performance requirements. I think you also need to look at Article 2 of the regulations, which covers what qualifies as organic waste recovery. Right now, you will not see transformation listed specifically, except as it relates to biomass facility. So I think it depends on, I probably need a little more detail, and we can do an offline conversation, or you can follow up with me so I can understand more about what you mean by transformation. So there's a few things that kind of depend there. Is it a biomass facility? And then looking at the solid waste facility regulations, does it meet the requirements of a high diversion organic waste processing facility? And on the face of it, I would say no, but I would like to delve in, make sure I fully understand the question.
All right, so our next question is from Keith. Keith, you can go ahead and unmute yourself to ask your question.
Hi, good morning. Just have a question on if a county or any jurisdiction has a non-mandatory collection, so they can opt out of trash altogether, or any of these programs, say on the residential side, how is SB 1383 going to be applied? I mean, is the county going to have to say it's got to be mandatory, even though they have a non-mandatory collection? How is that going to work?
Sure. Keith, thanks for the question. A little bit of a complex answer. So the regulations do require jurisdictions to provide, not offer, mandatory collection services. This needs to be addressed in the ordinance that the jurisdiction will need to have in place by January 1, 2022. With that said, the regulations do allow for jurisdictions to provide de minimis waivers, specifically for commercial businesses, and that's outlined in the regulations. We also have a frequently asked question that addresses a jurisdiction can allow residential generators to not subscribe to service, and that the parameters of that are up to the jurisdiction. So the regulations basically don't prohibit you from issuing or allowing a residential generator not to have that service. Additionally, the regulations do allow for generators to self-haul, manage materials on site, send materials to community composting, prevent waste in the first place. So I'd be happy to follow up with you more on your particular situation, but that kind of covers it in a high-level overview. Did that help?
Yeah, kind of. Thank you.
Sure. Why don't you feel free, Keith? We can set up a follow-up. If you want to go through your LAM liaison, we can have a follow-up conversation. We can talk through the details.
Very good. Thank you.
Sure.
The next question is from Oscar. Oscar, please unmute yourself to ask your question. Okay, so I'll ask Oscar's question. For rural exemption, what is the process to identify a justification as rural when the justification has small communities within the county, but overall exceed population requirements? Can there be a rural exemption for a small community within the justification?
Yeah, Oscar, thanks for that question. So for a rural exemption, you must fall within the definition of rural. So the scenario that you're presenting does not sound like that's the case. So what is in the regulations is what's called a low population waiver. That low population waiver can apply to any jurisdiction. If you are a city, there are certain parameters as far as the amount of current population and the amount of disposal that was happening in 2014. For an unincorporated area or a special district that provides solid waste collection services that's in an unincorporated area, then we do list the parameters for that, which is under 75 people per square mile in a census tract. So there could be some jurisdictions where their entire jurisdiction fits the low population criteria, or in most cases, what we're seeing are jurisdictions that portions of the unincorporated county apply. So if a city meets the criteria for a low population waiver, then the entire city can be waived from the obligation to collect organic waste. So Oscar, does that answer your question? Oh, you don't have a mic. Okay, maybe you can just put in the chat if that answered it. And if not, we can certainly do a follow-up. Oh, yes, great. Thanks, Oscar. Next question.
So the next question is from Savannah, and she does not have a mic, so I'll read it for you. She wants to know if a printable version of the FAQs for collections will be available. And the answer to that question is yes. We are working on printable versions of the FAQs. I'm assuming that we'll be sending out a listserv message once those are available. So please sign up for the SLCP listserv if you have not already.
And Savannah, one thing I would add to that is the collection FAQs in and of themselves are like 70 some pages. So be careful what you ask for because it's an awful lot. Right now, if there's a particular question, you can highlight it and copy it into a document. So there's some flexibility there. But if you do need the whole thing, as Julia said, we're working on it. Next question.
So it looks like that's all of the questions we've gotten through GoToWebinar. So if you do have a question and you're still listening, please type it into the question pane, and we are here until noon to answer your questions. So please keep them coming. Otherwise, that's it for now.
So since we have some time, I just wanted to recap all of the tools that we are currently developing. And this isn't just specific for collections or edible food or procurement, but I just wanted to highlight what CalRecycle is working on, along with what we've already currently released. And this is all on our revamped SB 1383 website. So on our website right now, we do have the model tools that HF&H helped us develop. With that, we do have some case studies that HF&H helped develop as well. We have our R3 local jurisdiction service rate study, which talks about raising rates or how do you do that. Please note that was before COVID, so things may have changed a little bit, but there's still great information in the R3 study. We do have model signage and labels. So what one of the questions was about labeling, and what Julia went over in the collections portion of our webinar. And those model signage and labels are in different languages and have images attached to it as well. We also have an overview PowerPoint and video. We are working on updating that PowerPoint a little bit though, and we are producing new videos as we speak. We have guidance on CalRecycle's SB 1383 compliance process. So a little bit more about those NOVs or notice of violations that Alan briefly mentioned earlier, along with the corrective action plan. So we do have some guidance on that. It's about a 3-pager. Again, we revamped our website, which includes by topic. So collections, edible food, procurement, and there is more to come on that. and we have it by audience base. So if you're a jurisdiction, if you're a hauler, if you're a non-local entity, we have pages for you, or they will be updated soon. As Michelle mentioned earlier, we have released our procurement calculator, and there will be a webinar on that next week. If you do not have the link to register for that webinar, please email the SLCP inbox and I will get that to you. And last but not least, we did just update our website to include local implementation examples. So this is real life examples of what your peers or your jurisdictions are doing to help implement 1383, whether that's a webinar, PowerPoints, their model signage. We're putting up local implementation examples. If you'd like yours featured, please send it to the SLCP inbox. We do request that you send hyperlinks. That's just so we could get around the ADA compliance part. It's easier for us to hyperlink to your website. We'll review it, and then if it's okay, we'll put it up on the website. So some things coming up in the future. As I mentioned, we are doing training videos to further support and understand the requirements of 1383. As Kara mentioned earlier, for edible food, but also for collections, we do have capacity planning tools. We're hoping to release them sometime in April, as long as technology agrees with us. So we will have an organics waste capacity planning calculator. And for edible food, we'll have something like a calculator, a survey, and the Tier 1 and Tier 2 generator ID best management practices. Along with that, coming in the summertime, so sometime in July, August, we'll have a model implementation record keeping tool. So as you guys have seen in 1383, there's quite a bit of record keeping. So we are going to release an electronic sample of what that looks like. Also in the summer, around August, we are going to be releasing what the department issued waiver forms look like. Again, in August or September, we're going to be doing that route review best managed practices. We're hoping to include some videos, but we have been delayed with COVID and us not being able to really get out in the field. And then also in early summer, or in summer and early fall, we're going to be doing the Article 2 technology reviews process and applications. So it's a lot that we're doing, but we're here to help you guys. If you need anything else or any other tools that I haven't mentioned, please let us know. We're always here to provide the assistance. Kara's group and some of our other teams have presented at board meetings, council meetings. We're here to support you on that. I like to say that we're here to be the bad guy if you need us to be the bad guy and explain whatever you want us to explain. But we're here to support you in that efforts too, because we know sometimes it's hard to really get the decision makers to understand what 1383 is about and how big this encompasses, right? It's not just our recycling world anymore. We're hitting public works, procurement goes across the board, edible food, that's something pretty brand new. And so we want people to understand that 1383 really is going to be a team effort and encompasses everybody. Also this week on Thursday, we have a solid waste facilities requirement webinar on February 4th, this Thursday from 9 to 10. So please sign up for that one. If you're interested, that's going to be a statewide webinar. We won't be touching regionals for that one. As I mentioned, the procurement calculator is next week. Also something really cool, and this isn't just for 1383, but we are having a private funding webinar for recycling manufacturing infrastructure. So we know infrastructure is a hot topic for 1383 and just recycling or diversion in general. That is February 11th from 9 to I think 2 o'clock. Please let me know if you need the link for that one. We just did a public funding webinar. That has been recorded and we will post it once it becomes ADA compliant. And then as you guys know, this is the first of 6 regional webinars. So feel free to join the other ones as well. They'll probably have different questions, just depending on the region, but it may be nice to hear what throughout the state is doing. So if you need those dates and times, again, email SLCP and we'll get it to you. Sorry, that was super long-winded, but I just want to let you guys know everything that we're working on and how much we're here to support you guys while we're trying to be successful in implementing 1383.
And actually, we have one more question. And the question is there a link to these presentations or an overview that could be a good reference for jurisdictional legal counsel?
Yeah, perfect. Great question, Luke. So we will be posting this presentation on our website with the talking points once we make it ADA compliant, along with the recordings. But we could also customize certain PowerPoints. So Kara's team, our procurement team, Edible Food, they've done tons of presentations for councils. And so if there's anything specific you really want us to hone in on, for example, if you just want us to talk about edible food or collections, more than happy to customize it for you. So Luke, feel free to reach out to me or Kara or the SLCP inbox, and happy to discuss further on what your needs are.
Yeah, and Ashley, I'll just add what other comments are coming in, and kudos. You know, Luke and any of you that are jurisdictions, please also feel free to contact your local assistance liaison. And we'd love to talk to you more about what we can do to help, whether it's inform your legal counsel or your elected officials. We have a presentation tonight, Moreno Valley at 6 o'clock. So we're doing lots of, as Ashley said, lots of presentations to city councils and board of supervisors. The other tool that we can provide is we do have, as Ashley said, presentations that we can customize with you for that presentation to your elected officials. We also have created some sample staff reports so that many of you, when you are presenting to council or board of supervisors as a part of that item, you have to put together a staff report. And we've worked with some of our jurisdictions that came out the gate early with educating their elected officials. And so we have some sample staff reports. And finally, for rural counties and rural cities, the ESJPA has been actively working on developing an implementation plan and staff reports for rural counties and rural jurisdictions, as well as those that will be eligible for low population waivers. So if you're a member of the ESJPA, I encourage you to reach out to them as well for those resources. So there's a lot of support that we can provide in helping you develop your implementation plan. We also have been working closely with individual jurisdictions, helping them work through prioritizing over the next year on implementation. You know, what should they tackle first, as well as I think really important, talking to your elected officials about allocating staff resources, because I think Ashley said this at the beginning. These regulations are not just about public works anymore, right? These regulations, in fact, affect many departments within the county or the city, and it's really important that your elected officials are looking at it in that manner and allocating resources, making assignments appropriately. So, for example, in some jurisdictions, implementation of the edible food program may not be happening in public works. It might be happening in Department of Health, for example. So there's lots of different approaches that jurisdictions are taking. The most important thing is that you are allocating and identifying the staffing that should be in charge of various aspects. Thanks, Ashley.
Perfect. Thanks, Kara. And I just wanted to let you guys know, Philip from HF&H was able to actually print our FAQs. It didn't work for me, but it may work for you. So if people use the print to PDF on the FAQs, it removes all of the formatting and drop downs. So he was able to convert this to Word. Philip, I don't know if you have any other tips or guidance. I know it didn't work for me, but it may work for you guys. So if you need them now, maybe try that tip. Then we have some other questions. So Julia, I'll turn it back over to you.
Great, yeah. So we did have one question come in from Stephen Carter. Stephen, you can unmute yourself to ask your question. Okay, so I'll ask his question. So his question states, nothing in this chapter authorizes the jurisdiction to delegate its authority to impose civil penalties or to maintain an action to impose civil penalties to a private entity. The question is, can a hauler be tasked with assigning a charge to the customer for a contamination violation after inspections and NOTs have occurred?
Sure. Stephen, thanks for that question. Yeah, what you're talking about is contamination monitoring. And if the jurisdiction has additional processing fees or contamination fees, and if that is something you worked out with your hauler, that is allowed. It's not prohibited in the regulations. When we talk about delegation, we're talking about the requirements in the enforcement sections of the regulations, where enforcement, notice of violations, and penalties are issued. So, Ellen, I don't know if you or Tricia want to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, thanks, Kara. So from how I understand how the question was posed is regarding the jurisdiction's process and how they're developing their program for the imposition of any penalties to any generator that's are within the jurisdiction. If that's how I'm understanding it, within the regulations, the jurisdiction develops their process for enforcing upon within their jurisdiction beginning Jan 1 of 2024 as the regulations state. If I understand that correctly, believe that was the question. There may be something else within your question there, Steve, that I may not be understanding, but if that answers your question, feel free to chime in.
Yeah, Steve's question was primarily focused on fees associated with contamination monitoring, which the hauler is allowed to do. There's nothing that prohibits that. What I was interested in you hitting on is the other enforcement, right, requirements in the regulations that cannot be delegated to a private entity such as the hauler.
Oh, okay.
Right, yeah, we can't, you know, the hauler isn't someone who can give an NOV or give any kind of enforcement action toward a regulated entity. So I think that's what he's touching on, is that they can apply these contamination fees to the residents or the businesses regarding contamination. But any other kind of issuing of an NOV has to be done by the jurisdiction.
And we're assuming the NOT, which you put in there, Stephen, we're assuming that you meant NOV for notice of violations. Unless there was another acronym that NOT that you were referring to, but we'll assume that the NOT that you've written in your question is NOV.
Let us know. Thanks, you guys.
Sure.
All right, Ashley, this is Julia. There are no other questions in the questions box. So handing it over to you, and I think we can close out the webinar.
Perfect. Thanks, Julia. So I did just look at our SLCP inbox. There was a question. Apologize, they came in late and this is already covered, but will there be a recording of this webinar that can be viewed later? So yes, we are recording this in all of our webinars. We need to convert them so that they're ADA compliant, which requires us to produce a transcript of all of this. So once we do convert everything so they are ADA compliant, we will post it on the web. Please sign up for our listservs because that's where I send all of our blasts when we update things, including our website. So this will be on our website. I'm not sure how long it will take us, but it will be on our website sooner than later, hopefully, as long as technology, again, agrees with us. But we will be posting all of this, including the PowerPoint and the talking points once we make them ADA compliant. So I don't see anything else coming in, and that is okay. If you have any other questions, feel free to email the SLCP inbox. Again, the email address is slcp.organics@calrecycle.ca.gov. And if that is it, I will give you guys back 15 minutes of your time. And thank you guys so much for participating. We really appreciate it. And let us know if we could be of any help for anything else. So thank you and have a great rest of your day.